A week before the wedding, I found myself sitting at the long, polished dining table of the Caldwell estate, my fingers folded neatly in my lap. The golden evening light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling across the room in warm, deceptive tones. But the warmth was a lie. The walls, lined with centuries of portraits of stern-looking Caldwells, seemed to absorb it, leaving only cold shadows. Across from me, Victoria Caldwell's diamond bracelet caught the light, each flicker mocking me silently. Her smile was perfect, calculated, stretched over steel. Richard Caldwell, ever blunt, didn't even bother with pleasantries. His smirk alone spoke volumes. "We know who you are, what you want, and you won't get it." Then it came. A thick, gold-rimmed folder, sliding across the table, landing in front of me with a dull, unforgiving thud. The sound broke the silence in a way that made my chest tighten, each heartbeat echoing in my ears. I didn't need to open it to know. Victoria's voice was velvet over steel. "It's just a formality, dear. To protect the family assets. I'm sure you understand." I stared at her, my gaze unwavering. There was no warmth behind her words, no care for the life about to be upended at this very table. Only expectation. Only control. Ethan sat beside me, his arm brushing mine lightly under the table. I could feel the faint warmth of his skin, but it didn't comfort me. Not really. His hand slipped into mine, a fragile attempt at solidarity, or maybe a silent plea for me not to cause a scene. "Don't make this into a big deal," he whispered, his lips barely moving. His voice was trembling, though he tried to hide it. Trembling not for me, but for them. I turned to look at him fully. Really look at him. This was the man I had shared late-night tacos with, whispered dreams to, held close during thunderstorms. This was the man who had once said, "You're my home." And yet, here, he shrank before his parents, silent and small, afraid to even meet my gaze. The folder sat between us, golden edges gleaming in the soft light, promising devastation. I opened it carefully, lifting the first page, my eyes scanning the neat print of clauses that stripped me of everything. No marital property, no claim to assets I had helped build, no security, no protection. If the marriage ended, I would walk away with nothing, as if I had arrived with nothing. Victoria tapped the table lightly, nails clicking in rhythm with her certainty. "We hired the best attorneys in the state," she said. "It's for everyone's protection." Everyone's, I thought. Not mine, not Ethan's, just theirs. The word family fell from her lips like a verdict. Family, the very thing I had longed for my entire life. The irony was sharp, cutting through my chest. Family. For them, it meant control. For me, it had become a cautionary tale. I closed the folder, careful not to let my hands shake. Ethan's thumb rubbed small circles on my palm, anxious, hesitant, apologetic. "We can talk about it later," he murmured. "They're just being cautious." But it wasn't caution I saw in their eyes. It was certainty. Certainty that I would comply. Certainty that I would shrink. Certainty that I should feel grateful just to sit at that table. And worse, certainty that Ethan would make sure of it. My heart beat slow and heavy, each pulse dragging through my chest like lead. Love without courage. What was it worth? I pressed my lips together, swallowed the heaviness forming in my chest, and lifted my eyes to meet theirs once more. Calm, sharp, clear. "I need some time to think," I said quietly. Not a shout, not a plea, just a statement that cut through the room like glass. Richard frowned, as if I had violated some unwritten rule. Victoria's smile faltered, just slightly, the first crack in her carefully maintained facade. Ethan's hand slipped from mine, unsure whether to stop me or let me go. "Ava, wait," he whispered, but the words died in his throat. I picked up my coat, draping it around my shoulders with steady hands, and took a step toward the door. I looked at Ethan one last time. His eyes glistened with something: fear, regret, confusion. But he did not stand. He did not reach for me. He did not fight for me. And in that moment, something inside me quietly broke. Sometimes I realized silence hurts more than betrayal. The wind outside was sharp, slicing through the driveway as I stepped out. Rain began to fall, fat drops striking my cheeks, cold and relentless. Without looking back, I walked into the storm. The prenup folder remained on the table, golden and heavy, but the real damage had already been done. None of them, not even Ethan, understood that something fundamental had shifted the moment I stood up. I slid into my car, hands trembling now that no one could see. Rain streaked across the windshield, blurring the city lights. One thought echoed relentlessly through my mind. If love requires me to shrink myself, then maybe it isn't love at all. Hours later, in the quiet of my dimly lit apartment, the storm outside still raging, memories of how it all began came uninvited. 3 years ago, before prenups, before cold marble tables, before silence that tore me apart, I had met Ethan at a startup conference in San Francisco, hidden behind the anonymity I had built carefully over years. No one knew who I was, just another promising founder among many. He wasn't supposed to be there. He had slipped in to avoid a family dinner his mother had arranged with a business partner's daughter. And yet, he found me. He complimented the notebook I was sketching ideas in, not with flattery, but with genuine curiosity. "I like how your mind works," he had said. The sincerity in his voice disarmed me, made me feel human in a room full of people pretending to be important. Later, he confessed that he lived under the constant scrutiny of parents who didn't approve of anything he chose for himself. I laughed with him, soft and knowing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a connection, something real, unfiltered, unpolished. Our relationship bloomed slowly, gently. Coffee dates, walks by the marina, sunsets on rooftops, late-night talks where dreams were whispered softly, without pretense. I allowed myself to believe that love, quiet, gentle love, could rewrite someone's fears. But love doesn't erase conditioning. Love doesn't fortify courage where none exists. And I should have known that when a golden folder landed in front of me, the truth would be revealed. Even the man I loved could falter. As the rain outside finally slowed to a steady drizzle, I realized something I had been avoiding. Love, no matter how real, is never enough if the other person cannot meet you with backbone. And that night, alone in the storm, I understood that my life, my company, my freedom, my self-respect, was mine alone to protect. I had loved, I had trusted, I had hoped, and now I would stand on my own. 3 years ago, before golden folders and cold marble tables, before a storm of rain and silence, there was a conference. A tech conference in San Francisco, filled with the hum of ambition, the scent of overpriced coffee, and the constant clatter of people trying too hard to sound important. I was there as a speaker, though I preferred the anonymity of the crowd. Behind my carefully chosen blazer and glasses, I hid the identity of a woman who had built a $100 million company before most people even knew what a startup pitch was. The room was full of faces, all eager for recognition, all hungry for status. I stayed in the back, sketching in my notebook. Ideas, concepts, lines of code, algorithms, anything that would let me think without being noticed. My mind was focused, precise, deliberate, shielded. And then he appeared. Ethan. He didn't burst in theatrically. He didn't announce himself, didn't make the room about him. He slipped into the empty seat beside me, quiet, tentative, like a man avoiding notice entirely. The contrast was immediate. Whereas everyone else was shouting to be seen, he simply existed, observing the room without needing permission. "You draw like you think," he said casually, glancing at my notebook. Not as a critique, not as a challenge, just as an observation. I looked up, startled, and then studied him. He wasn't polished like the other attendees. His clothes were simple, neat, but not expensive. His posture was relaxed, but not arrogant. And his eyes were genuinely curious. He didn't glance at me to size me up, didn't pretend to care what I looked like. He wanted to see what was behind the mind. "I like how your mind works," he added softly, almost shyly, and then returned his attention to the presentation. Something in me softened. A rare moment of honesty in a room that thrived on pretense. Most people at that conference were performing, selling personas like stock shares. But Ethan, he was real. And for someone who had spent years learning to trust no one, that authenticity was magnetic. After the keynote, we found ourselves walking side by side, both carrying coffee cups that had long since gone cold. We talked quietly at first, about the presentation, about the speakers, about the latest trends in AI, but then it grew into something deeper. My parents. They don't approve of anything I choose on my own, he confessed at one point, voice low, almost embarrassed. He laughed softly, a little bitterly. Schools, jobs, friends, even what I wear. Everything has to be curated. I nodded, understanding too well. Freedom, I realized, was often an illusion. Control came in quiet, insidious ways, shaping lives silently, leaving people afraid to even speak their minds. "I get it," I said, my voice soft. "I've been there too. You think you're choosing, but sometimes life is just curated by everyone else around you." He glanced at me, eyes sharp now, studying me in a way that made me feel both exposed and seen. "You understand?" "I do," I replied. "More than you know." That was the moment something fragile and tentative began to take root between us. A shared understanding, unspoken yet powerful. Neither of us knew what it would become, but it felt like the start of something rare, something untouched by expectation. Over the next few days, we sought each other out, slipping into conversations whenever possible, as if the world outside the conference didn't exist. He asked questions that mattered, not the superficial ones people used to impress. And I answered honestly, not the polished answers I usually offered to the world. One afternoon, he suggested we go for coffee at a small, hole-in-the-wall cafe in Pacific Heights. Not fancy, not curated, just ordinary. But that ordinary felt revolutionary. The barista greeted him by name, remembering what he drank last week. The familiarity made me smile. This wasn't a place of pretense. This was a place where we could exist as ourselves. We talked for hours. About family, about fear, about dreams too delicate to share anywhere else. He told me stories of being a Caldwell, the weight of expectations, the invisible leash of a family's approval, the suffocating pressure to conform. I shared pieces of my own story, carefully, cautiously, revealing only the edges of my life that were safe to expose. In those hours, I realized something profound. For the first time in years, I was with someone who saw me. Not the company, not the persona, not the mask. Me. And he was just as real, just as flawed, just as vulnerable. Our relationship unfolded slowly, deliberately. Coffee dates became a ritual. We wandered through the marina, hands brushing, talking about books, ideas, music. We shared picnics in Caramel by the sea, where he would read passages from novels he loved, his voice soft over the sound of the waves. Weekend drives along Highway 1, windows down, letting the wind whip through our hair, became our escape from worlds that demanded perfection. We fell into nights spent on my couch, him resting his head in my lap, whispering dreams he had never shared with anyone else. I would stroke his hair, listen, and marvel at the trust between us. Trust built on nothing but honesty, quiet moments, and the understanding that we could be ourselves together. And yet, even in those early days, there were hints of the storm to come. Small hesitations when the topic of family arose, nervous glances when discussing future ambitions, a careful weighing of words, a subtle self-censorship that I barely noticed at the time. But I chose to see only what I wanted to see: warmth, courage, authenticity. I told myself that love could be enough, that our connection, built on patience and truth, could withstand any pressure. Weeks turned into months, and with every shared meal, every whispered confession, every stolen smile, I let myself believe in the possibility of love untainted by outside influence. I remember one particular evening, sitting on the rooftop of my apartment, city lights stretching endlessly below us. Ethan leaned against me, his head on my shoulder, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not like them," he said, pressing a kiss to my temple. "I want something different, something real." I believed him then, wholeheartedly. And for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps love, quiet and gentle, could truly rewrite someone's fears. Little did I know, the golden folder waiting in the future, the cold marble dining tables, the parental control and silence. It was already on the horizon, and that fragile, untested love would soon be forced to confront the harshest storm of all: reality. For now, though, in the glow of the Pacific Heights sun and the gentle hum of the city below, we were just Ethan and I. Two people who had found each other amidst noise and expectation. Two souls learning slowly what it meant to trust and to be seen. And I cherished every stolen moment, unaware that the world outside our bubble would one day demand choices that neither of us were ready to make. After those first stolen moments of connection, our love continued to grow, slowly, quietly, like a vine winding its way around the cracks of a crumbling wall. It was delicate and beautiful, but underneath it, a tension was slowly threading itself into the seams of our relationship. At first, it was almost imperceptible. Small things. Ethan hesitating before sharing an opinion about a project we were planning. A slight downward tilt of his head whenever the topic of family arose. A soft, almost apologetic tone when he disagreed with me. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just politeness, or maybe his way of handling stress. Then the dinners began. His parents, the Caldwells, hosted weekly gatherings at their estate, lavish, pristine affairs with crystal glasses that gleamed under chandelier light and polished silver that reflected more than just candle flames. I was invited cautiously at first, a test. Each time, I was reminded that I was not part of their world. I was tolerated, but barely. Victoria, always immaculate, always perfectly poised, treated me like an accessory to their family, not a partner to her son. Her smiles were sharp, strategic, veiled daggers beneath pearls and silk. Richard, ever the blunt enforcer, interrogated Ethan in ways that made me flinch. Not directly at me, but around me, his questions carrying an unspoken weight. And Ethan? He changed in front of them, not violently, not dramatically, but in subtle ways that cut deeper than any argument could. His shoulders tightened, his voice softened. Opinions I knew he held firmly were replaced with careful agreement. If I tried to nudge him gently, to encourage honesty, he would shrink further, like a flame threatened by the wind. It was terrifying, watching him morph into someone else. The man I had fallen in love with, warm, thoughtful, brave in his own quiet ways, seemed to vanish in the presence of his parents. He became a shadow of himself, and I felt powerless to reach him. One evening, during a particularly lavish dinner, I tried to intervene in a small way. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to," I whispered to him, as Victoria hovered nearby, asking pointed questions about his career plans. Ethan's eyes flickered toward me, pleading silently, but he answered anyway. Polite, controlled, measured, not the Ethan I knew. I clenched my fork tightly in my hand, wishing I could shake him into remembering who he was, who we were, before this family had wrapped its cold fingers around him. These dinners became rituals of silent erosion. Over months, I saw it clearly. Love alone couldn't protect him from the conditioning he had lived under since birth. The constant expectation to comply, to please, to yield was insidious. It invaded our private moments, seeping into his laughter, his speech, his very demeanor. And I began to notice the warning signs in other ways too. He would cancel plans at the last minute if Victoria demanded attendance at some social function. He would apologize for mistakes he didn't make, just to avoid disapproval. He spoke less and less, replacing curiosity and passion with quiet acquiescence. I kept asking myself if love could be enough. If patience, if understanding, could restore the man I had met in San Francisco. But with every dinner, every subtle compromise, the distance between us grew. The first time I truly feared for us, he came to me after a particularly tense family lunch. We were sitting in my apartment, the city lights glowing faintly behind the blinds. His shoulders were hunched, his voice low. They're very particular, he said, not finishing the thought. His hands trembled slightly. I don't want to upset them. I took his hand, pressing it gently. Ethan, you have to be yourself. That's the only way this works. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Fear, guilt, longing. I know. I want to. I do. But I can't sometimes. And there it was, the seed of doubt, not in me, but in the man I loved. Love alone could not shield him from fear. Love alone could not give him the courage to stand against a lifetime of conditioning. Our relationship continued, but each day carried a growing weight. I watched him shrink into a version of himself that was acceptable to others but unfamiliar to me. His brilliance, his warmth, the small gestures that had drawn me to him, they were still there, buried beneath layers of restraint. I tried reasoning with myself. Maybe he needed more time. Maybe love could be patient. But the unease gnawed at me. I could feel it in my chest, an ever-tightening coil of tension. Then came the confrontation I had long dreaded, the golden folder, the prenup, the moment when the world I had built with him collided with the world his parents had constructed around him, and suddenly, patience, understanding, and hope were not enough. I remember the feel of the folder sliding across the polished table. The thud was deafening, echoing in the silence that filled the room. Ethan's hand brushed mine under the table, small and tentative, a silent plea for compliance. And yet, the silence that followed, the inability to defend me, to even challenge his parents, spoke volumes. It was in that moment I realized something I had suspected for months, but hadn't dared name. Love without courage is fragile. Love without backbone cannot withstand the pressure of control and fear. Ethan loved me, I knew, but he loved them more. Not in a way that was conscious or malicious, but because that fear had been drilled into him for decades. Obedience, compliance, the careful navigation of parental expectation. It was instinctual, unavoidable. I had loved a man, not a family's puppet, and that distinction, once clear, cut deeper than any words could. By the time I left the Caldwell estate that night, rain pelting my face as I walked toward my car, I understood something fundamental. Love alone would never be enough. If I wanted to survive this, if I wanted to survive myself, I had to be willing to stand alone. The storm outside mirrored the storm within me. Each drop of rain was a reminder of what I had learned, that sometimes the greatest battles are not with enemies, but with the people you love. And sometimes The hardest choice is choosing yourself over them. I slid into my car, rain streaking across the windshield like shattered glass. I knew what I had to do next, though I didn't yet know how. Ethan's face haunted me, the gentle, hesitant boy I had met years ago, now shackled by invisible chains. And yet, even in his fear, there was a sliver of hope. The golden folder had been a warning, a symbol of the battle I knew I could not avoid. But nothing, no late-night conversation, no whispered confession, no stolen moment of warmth, could have prepared me for the stark, suffocating reality of the Caldwell estate that evening. The room was vast, elegant, cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a setting sun, painting everything in deceptive gold. But it was just light on marble, on portraits, on centuries of old money that demanded obedience. I sat at the long dining table, my hands folded, trying to keep my pulse calm, while the two people across from me radiated control. Richard's smirk was sharp, Victoria's smile polished to perfection, her eyes glinting with calculated expectation. Ethan sat beside me, shoulder brushing mine, his hand sliding into mine under the table, a gesture at once intimate and fraught. But when I searched for courage in his eyes, I found only hesitation, fear, and a longing for approval that eclipsed everything else. He whispered, barely audible, "Don't make this a big deal." And I realized then that he had already folded before a battle I had not yet even begun to fight. The folder landed on the table with a dull, authoritative thud. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. Victoria leaned back, her diamond bracelet catching the dying light, mocking me in its brilliance. "It's just a formality," she said, velvet words stretched over steel. "To protect the family assets. You understand, dear." I stared at the folder. I didn't need to open it. But I did. Slowly, carefully. The first page bore my name, neatly printed, followed by a series of clauses that stripped me of everything. Every marital right erased, no claim to property, no claim to assets I had built or would build, no protection if the marriage ended. If I walked away, I would walk away with nothing, as if I had arrived with nothing. Richard's smirk deepened. "We hired the best attorneys," he said, casual but cutting. "This is for everyone's protection." Everyone's, I thought bitterly. Not mine, not Ethan's, just theirs. The word family hovered in the air, heavy, ironic, cruel. The one thing I had longed for my entire life, love, acceptance, belonging, had become the instrument of my humiliation. Ethan's hand rubbed my palm in tiny circles, an apology without words, a plea without courage. He whispered, "We can talk about it later." But in that whispered promise, I heard nothing but surrender. It wasn't caution I saw in their eyes. It was certainty. Certainty that I would comply. Certainty that I would fold. Certainty that Ethan would make me fold. And when I turned to him, searching for resistance, for support, I saw only retreat. His head bowed slightly, eyes downcast, waiting for permission that would never come. Love without courage is fragile, I reminded myself. Love without backbone is a door with no hinges, solid, in appearance, hollow in strength. I pressed my lips together and lifted my eyes slowly, meeting Victoria's polite cruelty, Richard's assured dominance, and Ethan's quiet abdication. My calm, deliberate, sharp, "I need some time to think." The words fell into the room, cutting cleanly through expectation. Richard frowned. Victoria's smile faltered, the first crack in her facade. Ethan's hand slipped from mine, unsure whether to stop me or let me go. "Ava, wait," he whispered, but his voice trailed off. He didn't rise, didn't argue, didn't shield me. He didn't defend me. And in that absence of action, the truth struck me harder than any words ever could. Sometimes, silence hurts more than betrayal. I stood, slipping my coat over my shoulders, and walked toward the door. Each step echoed in the hall lined with generations of Caldwells, their painted eyes watching me like judges in a courtroom I never chose. Outside, the sky had darkened, storm clouds gathering over the coastline. The first drops of rain hit my cheek. I didn't look back. I got into my car, trembling, rain streaking the windshield. The folder remained on the table inside, but the damage wasn't in ink or paper. It was in the realization that Ethan, my Ethan, would not fight with me. That love, in its purest, quietest form, was not enough to overcome fear rooted in a lifetime of control. The memories came unbidden, drifting into my mind like fragments of a dream. I had met Ethan 3 years ago, before golden folders, cold tables, and suffocating silence. I remembered the startup conference in San Francisco, the moment he sat beside me, casual, unassuming, genuine. He had complimented my notebook, not to impress, not to charm, but to see. And I had been seen, truly seen. He had been different then, warm, attentive, sincere, vulnerable even, yet unafraid. And I, starved for authenticity, had fallen for him, believing in the quiet magic of something real. Our early days were a series of small, perfect rebellions against a world that demanded performance. Coffee at hole-in-the-wall cafes, evening walks along the marina, weekend drives down Highway 1. Late-night conversations on my couch, him resting his head in my lap, whispering dreams too fragile to share elsewhere. He had promised me, softly, in the quiet of a rooftop under city lights, "I want something different, something real." And for a while I believed him. But love doesn't erase conditioning. Love doesn't equip someone to resist the invisible chains they've lived under since childhood. Over time, the man I loved became someone else around his parents, muted, careful, obedient. The warm, fearless Ethan I had known shrank into silence whenever they entered a room, leaving only the shadow of a man I couldn't reach. I had tried to rationalize it. Maybe he needed time. Maybe love could be a refuge, a safe space. Maybe patience could rebuild him. But the prenup shattered that illusion. It was the clearest proof that no matter how much he loved me, no matter how sincere, he would not, could not, stand against them. Standing in the storm outside the Caldwell estate, rain lashing my face, I understood something fundamental. Love alone was never enough, not here, not with him, not in a world where silence and fear outweighed passion and loyalty. As I drove home, soaked and shivering, I knew that the next step had to be mine alone. The golden folder would remain on that table, but my choices would not be dictated by anyone else. Not by them, not by him. Sometimes, the hardest lesson isn't learning to fight others. It's learning to fight for yourself, even when the person you love most cannot fight alongside you. And in that cold, relentless rain, I promised myself I would not shrink. I would not apologize for wanting respect. I would not trade my freedom for the illusion of love. The world outside my window blurred in streaks of rain, but inside, a clarity had formed. I had loved, I had trusted, I had hoped. Now, I would rise. Alone. The rain had followed me home like a shadow, relentless and insistent, streaking across the city lights and turning the streets into a liquid mirror. I sat in my dimly lit apartment, the room smelling faintly of coffee and wet pavement, watching the droplets race down the glass. Each streak felt like an echo of the storm I had just walked through, not only outside, but inside. It was quiet here. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that forced memory to surface unbidden. Memories that were both sweet and bitter, impossible to sort neatly. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, and let my mind wander to how it had all begun. 3 years ago, I had met Ethan in San Francisco. The memory was vivid, almost painfully so. The startup conference, buzzing with ambition and ego, had felt suffocating until he appeared. Not flashy, not pretense, just quietly himself. The way he had complimented my notebook, not as a performance, not to charm, but to genuinely see me, had disarmed me. That authenticity had been rare, almost a miracle in a room filled with self-importance. I remembered the way he had smiled, unself-consciously, eyes bright with curiosity. How he had shared pieces of his life carefully, cautiously. My parents, they don't really approve of anything I choose on my own, he had confessed. I had nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Freedom, I knew, was often a myth. And yet, in those moments, I had felt a connection I had never known before. Recognition, honesty, vulnerability. We had built our own little universe in stolen moments. Coffee in hole-in-the-wall cafes, late-night walks along the marina, weekend drives down Highway 1. Each memory was a small rebellion against a world that demanded performance, obedience, and conformity. I remembered picnics by the sea, him reading aloud from books he loved, his voice soft over the sound of the waves. Sunset dinners on rooftops, city lights glowing below, him leaning close and whispering, "I want something different, something real." I had believed him, truly. I had allowed myself to hope that love, gentle and quiet, could overcome the pressures that threatened us, and for a time it seemed enough. But love alone is not always enough. I had ignored the signs at first. The way he would shrink when his parents spoke, the way he hesitated to voice his opinions, the way he seemed to apologize for things he didn't do. It had been subtle at first, easy to rationalize. Everyone behaves differently around family, I had told myself. But the pattern grew clearer, inexorable, unavoidable. Ethan had become someone else when his parents were near, muted, careful, obedient, afraid. I thought of the dinners, the polite interrogations, the calculated smiles. Victoria and Richard had a way of making people feel small while smiling as if it were a kindness. And Ethan, he had folded before them, like he always had, like he always would. His hand brushing mine beneath the table, a whisper of apology. His silence louder than any words could have been. That night, the golden folder slid across the table like a verdict, but the true damage had already been done. I remembered sitting in my car afterward, rain pelting the windshield, thinking that perhaps the hardest part was not the prenup, not the insult, not even the humiliation, but the absence of the one person I had trusted most. The one person who could have stood with me, who could have turned the tide, had instead retreated into silence. The irony was sharp. I had loved him for his courage, his honesty, his warmth. And yet, when the test came, when the storm demanded action, he had been unable to rise to it. Love, I realized then, is not just feeling, it is also choice, and courage, and backbone. Without these, it cannot withstand reality. I closed my eyes and let the memories continue, unbidden. I remembered the laughter, the warmth, the tenderness. I remembered late-night tacos, whispered dreams, quiet confessions on rooftops. I remembered thinking, in the soft glow of the city lights, that perhaps we had found something rare, something unshakable. And now I understood that those moments, though beautiful, had existed in isolation. They had been a haven, not a fortress, a temporary sanctuary, not a guarantee. I thought of the storm outside my window, the rain still falling in relentless sheets, and I realized something profound. The storm does not respect comfort or hope or love. It comes regardless, and it tests everything in its path. Some withstand it together, some must stand alone. I had loved truly. I had trusted. I had hoped. But I would not shrink. I would not apologize for wanting respect. I would not trade my freedom for the illusion of love. The city lights blurred through the rain on the glass, and I felt the Weight of everything. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the quiet lessons learned. And beneath it all, a pulse of something new. Resolve. A clarity that I had not dared to embrace until now. I was my own person. I had built my life. I had fought for it, and I would continue to fight. Not for love that faltered under pressure, but for myself. Ethan had been part of my story, a beautiful, complicated chapter. But the story was not over, and it was mine to write. Alone, yes, but stronger than I had ever been before. I rose from the chair, moving to the window. The rain had slowed, streaking the streets like liquid light. I let my hand rest on the glass, tracing patterns in the water. Somewhere beyond the storm, the city continued. Somewhere beyond the pain, there would be clarity, strength, and perhaps a love that would meet me where I truly stood. But for now, I would simply stand. Upright, unbroken, determined. Sometimes the hardest choices, I realized, are not about fighting others. They are about fighting for yourself. And tonight, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, I had finally chosen me. The golden folder remained in the Caldwell estate, a symbol of what could have been. But what mattered now was not what was left behind. It was what I would carry forward. The rain stopped. The storm had passed. And I, for the first time in years, felt something I hadn't dared to hope for in a long time: freedom.